You see, for 37 years, I was so deeply entrenched, ensconced, enveloped in my Jewish story that I didn't see the Palestinians. I didn't see them. They're 80% of the population, perhaps even more. But for me, they were like the gray, drab scenery that passes in the background of the movie, but is not part of the plot. You can just ignore them because they're not important. My Jewish education had trained me to see only my people and my story. And I just walked right by the Palestinians. And how did I wake up and see that there was someone I didn't see? Well, there's a long process, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about the way stations in that process. I was driving in my car, and I had with me two guests from the US driving around my house in Judea. They wanted me to show them the flourishing of Jewish settlement, how the Bible, the biblical dreams of that the prophets said the Jews would come back, how it's all coming true. So we drove around, and I showed them the trees we planted and the roads we paved and the houses we built. And as we're driving, I picked up a hitchhiker and another one. When both of the hitchhikers left the car, one of the guests that I had, one of the two guests, he turned to me and a big grin, this guy from Texas, and he said, Hanan, you just did a great thing. You taught us a lesson in Jewish ethics. You picked up hitchhikers. No one does that in Texas, he said. Thank you. So I said, Bob, look, it's not just me. We all pick up hitchhikers around here because we have a common mission. We trust each other. And I said to Bob, just like everyone else, I do my best to pick up every person who puts out his finger asking for a ride. And by the time I finished that sentence, I realized that I was lying. I was lying to my guests in the car, Bob and Kevin, but even worse, I was lying to myself. I said I pick up every person, but the real truth was I pick up every Jew. I'd never picked up a Palestinian in my life. So how did I dare say that I pick up every person? Clearly, and it dawned on me like a ton of bricks at the very moment in the car, clearly, because I didn't see the Palestinians as persons. They weren't real for me. They were part of the scenery. And I said to myself, there's something rotten in my heart. And I said to my two guests in the car who happened to be Protestant pastors, it was like a confession. I said, Bob and Kevin, I think I've discovered that I'm sick. And I have to find a way to do something about that. What I decided to do is to meet Palestinians, something I'd never done before. 35 years of living where I live in Judea, I never met one. Because I thought that if I meet them, they'll become human in my eyes, they'll become real. So I went on a mission, let's say a journey, to meet Palestinians, and I failed. I failed for a few months because there was no one who could introduce me. I didn't have any bridges to the Palestinians. Now, I want to tell you, there's a Palestinian village literally 500 meters from my front door, literally. But I can't just go and knock on the door and say, I want to meet you for my spiritual journey. They'll think I'm crazy. They won't understand me. So it took a while, but it happened. I got an invitation to a unique event that was meant to introduce settlers to their local Palestinian neighbors. It was organized by a Protestant pastor who came from the US to help neighbors meet each other. So I got the invitation. It was going to be January 2014, exactly 7 years ago, the last Thursday of the month in the afternoon. I went to the front door of my house and I started to walk out. My wife said, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to meet Palestinians. My wife screamed. She said, you can't do that, they'll kill you. And she was really shaken. And the truth is, I was almost afraid as she was. I walked out the door and my heart was pounding. I had a map that said where to go. It was only supposed to be a 22-minute walk, so I didn't have to take the car. I walked through the vineyards and orchards around my house and I got to the place. And it's the place where you guys are sitting right now. It's that Palestinian piece of land surrounded by a rock fence. I walked in the middle gate. There was nothing in there 7 years ago, no classrooms and no patio, just a few trees. I saw something in that compound that really can't be. I saw 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians. They were doing the strangest thing. They were talking to each other. That doesn't happen where we come from. And I saw this Palestinian woman who was not involved in a conversation. Everyone else was milling around and talking. She was standing alone. I walked right up to her. She's in brown from head to toe. Only her face is visible. And I was really afraid. I said hello to her. She said hello back to me. We talked in English. And after I think a minute, I said to her, I can't believe I'm talking to you. And she said to me, I can't believe I'm talking to you because we don't talk to Israelis. We talked for another minute. And then her son came over. She told me he's Yazin. His name is Yazin. He's 17 years old. So Yazin and I shake hands. And I see that Yazin is wearing a windbreaker. And on the jacket are 3 words right over here in English, 3 words in English. And the 3 words were seeds of peace. Seeds of peace. I see some of you are nodding your heads. Perhaps you've heard of Seeds of Peace. I had never, ever heard of Seeds of Peace. I had no idea what it is, but I looked at that word peace. And I looked at the young man's face. And I said, he's a Palestinian. His jacket says peace. No, this is impossible. It doesn't make any sense because Palestinians and peace don't go together. So it was clear to me that he doesn't know what his jacket said. Perhaps someone gave it to him. He found it on the ground. So jokingly, I said, Yazin, what's this Seeds of Peace thing? I thought he said, I don't know. And he goes on to tell me that Seeds of Peace is a summer camp in the United States, in the state of Maine. And he said it takes Israeli kids and Palestinian kids out of this conflict zone for a summer of recreation and reconciliation. He said he was in the camp that past summer, like 4 months ago. He just got back, had a great time, met Israeli kids there. They're friends on Facebook, he said. And he said he was so affected, so transformed by that summer that now he wants to spend some of his life building bridges of peace between our 2 peoples. And Yazin, I'm looking at him, I'm listening. I have no idea if I can believe what he's saying. What he's saying contradicts everything that I think to be true. You might say that Yazin was the first Palestinian that began the process of unsettling me. So I was confused. And then his father walks over. He tells me his name is Jamal. We shake hands. Jamal and I shake hands. Jamal tells me that he and his family are from the Palestinian city of Beit Umar, which is about a 6-minute drive from my house, 20,000 human beings. He says Beit Umar, and I don't know what to do. Because Beit Umar, that's where the terrorists come from. I have a friend who was killed right by Beit Umar. I myself once encountered a roadblock with big, big boulders on the road. I had to get out of the car in the middle of the night and remove the boulders, afraid I'm going to be ambushed. I'm afraid of the people of Beit Umar. Now I'm talking to one of them. That was really challenging. So Jamal tells me a little bit of the story of his life, and I'm going to tell you 2 stories that he told me. One, he said, Hanan, you know, there's no Jews in Beit Umar. There's no Israelis in Beit Umar. There's only the soldiers who guard the entrance, the Israeli soldiers, and we hate the soldiers. So by extension, we hate all the Jews and all the Israelis. No one in Beit Umar would ever want to meet one, ever want to meet an Israeli or a Jew. But he told me he had one neighbor who was different than everyone else in Beit Umar. This neighbor used to go to Israeli Jewish together with Palestinian Muslims for dialogue in the city of Jericho, interfaith dialogue. And this friend of Jamal's asked him to come along once to the city of Jericho to interfaith dialogue. And Jamal told me, he said as follows, I told my friend, I'll never come with you. That's only for the weak people and the traitors. He refused. But his friend wouldn't get off his back, kept trying to convince him month after month. Once Jamal tagged along and went. And Jamal said, Hanan, I sat in the corner. I wasn't part of the circle in which all were listening and talking, but I listened from the side. And at one point, Jamal is telling me this story, one of the Jewish men got up from his chair and walked towards me, walked toward Jamal. And Jamal said, I was really afraid what he'd do to me. He came right up to me and he forced me to shake his hand. And he asked me questions I had to answer and was really, really uncomfortable. And when the guy finally left, Jamal said, I wiped the sweat off my brow and I ran to the bathroom to wipe off the filth from my hands from touching an Israeli. And I vowed never to come back to this terrible place. Jamal told me he went home, told his wife, she agreed. He made a big mistake going. They shouldn't tell anyone. But Jamal's friend kept trying to convince Jamal to come back. and he refused. But eventually his friend got the best of him and Jamal went back. And then a third time and a fourth time, and then his wife came with him and they brought the whole family. And then Jamal stops the story and he looks at me and he says, Hanan, where I thought there was only an enemy, I found a human being and a partner, and it changed me. So now I'm even more confused. Palestinians, interfaith dialogue, being transformed, finding a partner. What are you talking about? That can't be. And then Jamal tells me another story. He says, Hanan, you know that the little kids in Beit Umar, when they see someone who looks like you, they start to cry. I said, Jamal, why do they start to cry? And Jamal didn't understand why I don't understand. And finally, Jamal said, Hanan, it's the kippah you have on your head. And it's the long beard, because everyone who looks like you carries a submachine gun. He does like this, and they go into Beit Umar and they kill the kids. So I said to myself, what is he talking about? This is borderline anti-Semitism. My people don't do things like that. But somehow I understood that my job at the moment was not to argue, but to listen. So I didn't say anything. And there was really long, uncomfortable silence. I realized this was a moment of blessing for me. Finally, I'm experiencing how the other experiences me. And then I get it. I have a picture in my mind how my neighbors look to the Palestinians. We look different than them, and we carry guns. We carry guns. I said to Jamal, finally, Jamal, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. He said, what are you talking about? You're not afraid of us, we're afraid of you. And I was confused. I understood and I was confused. And then we sat in a circle, 15 Israelis, 15 Palestinians, and the owner of the land, Ali Abu Awad, a Palestinian from Beit Umar, Ali said, welcome to my land. Thanks for joining us here today. I'll tell you something about my family. We're from Kubeba. Today it's called Lachish or Kiryat Gat. In 1948, the Israelis threw us out of there, conquered the land. We moved to Beit Umar in the West Bank. 1967, Israel came again and conquered us. And since then, we live under the rigors and the difficulties and the suffering of the Israeli occupation. Israeli, what did he say? I had no idea what he was talking about. What's this occupation thing? Now, I'd read in the newspaper, I heard on the radio that the European Union always condemns the Israeli occupation, and the same thing with the UN, but I didn't really think there was such a thing. I'd never seen it, because when I ride in my car on the roads of Samaria, when I walk in the fields of Judea, I don't see occupation. I see the return of the Jewish people to our ancient homeland after 2,000 years of exile. I see soldiers who are defending Jewish honor. And Ali Abu Awad is telling us that our Jewish triumph is his nation's tragedy. And our nation's coming home is his nation's occupation, his nation's occupation. And he tells us terrible stories of what the occupation did to himself and his family, about jail, about torture, about suffering, about people being killed. And he said, this is Palestine. I wanted to get up and say, you're a liar, Ali, that can't be. But I understood that he wasn't giving a political discourse. He wasn't trying to convince us of anything. He was just giving his life story. So he wasn't lying, but it contradicted everything I knew. And I went home. Excuse me, I just have to close the door. I went home and I remember pacing back and forth in my study for a few hours and then a few days, trying to figure out what's going on here. I say it's Israel, and Ali says it's Palestine. I say it's ours, and he says it's theirs. I was getting nauseous because I realized that there was a whole story in this land that I hadn't heard, even though I'd lived in it for 37 years. And I felt a little bit ridiculous. But I have to meet these people. And I went and searched out Ali Abu Awad and we talked. And we talked more. And other Palestinians gathered around Ali, and other Israelis also joined. We talked for months, and somehow we decided unconsciously, without setting down ground rules, that we're not here to yell and scream at the other. We're not here to say, you're right, I'm right, and you're wrong. We're here just to do one thing that has two aspects to it. We're here to tell stories and to listen to stories. Ali told the story of his family, of his identity, of his people, again and again and again. And then when we Israelis, we Jews, heard him talk about his homeland, Palestine, it was like a dagger to our hearts. We wanted to run away, but we didn't, we listened. And when we Israeli Jews told the Palestinians that we've come home after 2,000 years of exile, we've come home to the land of Israel, it was like a dagger to their hearts. And they wanted to run away and not listen, but they listened. And after a few months, one day Ali said to me, Hanan, it looks like we have to find a way to fit two truths into one heart. Two truths into one heart and into one land. And that's what we began to do. We began to expand our hearts. That doesn't mean to deny your own identity. That doesn't mean to adapt a universal identity that there are no peoples, no Jews, no Muslims, no Palestinians, no Israelis, we're all just one happy human family. No, we stayed strong in our identity. They're Muslims and Christians and they're Palestinians. We're Israeli Jews, we're Zionists. But we also were able to expand our sense of truth and of legitimacy to understand that we're not the only people in this land. We're not the only religion. We're not the only legitimate national identity. It's our land, but it's also their land. And as we begin to develop this really, really difficult and challenging dual narrative, we began to see how we and all of our peoples develop their identities upon the foundation of the nullification of the other side's identity. We began to see that my side, you know what my side says? My side says Palestinian. No, you're not a Palestinian. There's no such thing as Palestinian. There never was a Palestinian state. You're just Arabs. And Arabs can be anywhere. So go back to Syria, go back to Lebanon, go back to Jordan. And the Palestinians say to the Israelis, Jew, it's wonderful to be a Jew. The Quran loves the Jewish religion, but it's the Jewish religion, not the Jewish people. There's no such thing as the Jewish people. Religions don't need land, so go back to Russia where you came from. Go back to New York. What are you colonizing our land for? And each side thinks they can tell the other side who they are. And we decided that no one can tell me who I am, and I can't tell them who they are. You have to let the other tell his or her story. And that's the truth. We began to understand that the whole land is Palestine and the whole land is Israel. It's all theirs and it's all ours. Two truths in one heart. And we founded an organization, we founded Roots. And we decided that piece of farmland owned by Ali would become the center, the community center that I told you earlier about where we're sitting right now, the Dignity Center. It's a local initiative to bring local people to open their eyes, to go beyond their blindness, to go beyond their sickness, and become healthier by meeting your neighbor, seeing your neighbor, accepting your neighbor as an individual and as part of a national collective. And the disease we are trying to heal, I have a name for it. I call it the hubris of exclusivity. The hubris of exclusivity. It's a disease that convinces me, it's a virus that teaches me that I am real and you're fake. I have all the truth and you don't belong here. We founded Roots, the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. And for the past 7 years, except for the time of the virus, we've been having activities almost every day to bring together local people to meet local people. That means little kids programs and kid programs for kids in 8th grade and 9th grade. And then we have our youth movement of high school kids. It's all Israelis and Palestinians together. learning about each other, religion, photography, narrative, planning trips together. We have a day camp and a summer camp. We have women's photography workshops. We have a music group. We have a therapy group. We have 3 different interfaith dialogue groups. We have Ramadan dinners. We have celebrations of each other's holidays. We have lectures learning about each other's culture. And we're humanizing the other. But as I come to the end, I want to make it clear that everything I said is true, but it's not enough. Because in the end, there's occupation. The Palestinians live under occupation without human rights. And Israelis live in fear. The present situation is wrong, it's bad. It has to change yesterday. The work we're doing in Roots is essential, but it's not enough. There also has to be a political settlement. What we in Roots don't get involved in the political settlement, we say that we're creating the human groundwork that's necessary for a future political settlement, because we need a political settlement, but the core of the problem is not just political. It's not just land. It's not just resources. It's not just security. The fundamental issue is one of identity. Who are we and who are they? It's religion, it's identity, it's history. So until we deal with those subjects as human beings and accept the identity of the other side, until then, the political discussions, I think, will go nowhere. The identity, the acceptance of identity, the expanding of consciousness, the getting over the hubris of exclusivity, that's what's going to provide the foundation for a future, a political solution that will grant dignity, human rights, security, peace to both sides in this little sliver of land that we both call home. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanan. Quite a stirring, fascinating, eye-opening presentation for us to grasp, to start to grapple with, and try to understand. It looks as though Noor isn't here yet with us. So perhaps we can take a couple of questions to Hanan and hope that Noor does join us.
Let me, I see there's no reception for my cell phone where I am right now. Let me just go away for a few seconds and call him.
Okay.
See what happened. I'm really, I'm sorry.
Not a problem. Hopefully it's not a problem of no internet or no signal or anything like that. We shall see in a minute. Does anyone want to make any comments or ask any initial questions which we can put to Hanan when he comes back?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Karen, do you want to?
Yes. Hi everyone, and happy Hanukkah to everyone. I want to thank Hanan for his very interesting talk. I also want to say, I put in the chat that Rabbi Froman from Tekoa in Gush Etzion, he tried to make peace with his Arab neighbors, and he used to try and speak to the PLO and Hamas. He was a man of peace, a very orthodox rabbi, and he also tried to do something along these lines, maybe in a different way, but he died in 2013. The other thing I wanted to ask, I think Hanan's idealism is wonderful. However, how do we deal with the vitriol that's taught to Palestinian children on TV and in schools against Israeli people and Jewish people? And how can we counteract that if we want to go forward? I know it's all part of the political picture that Hanan spoke about, but we have to deal with that in order to go. If they're going to be feeding children such hatred, you know, it's all very good on one side teaching them the peace side of things, which I'm in favor of very much so, but how do we deal with the hatred coming from the other side?
Sure.
Well, we can put that to Hanan in a moment. I'm not sure it's quite the right place in the evening to actually look at that. And I hear where you're coming from. And I think there are sort of
Could you
certainly
join
No,
us
can.
right now?
I admire what Hanan's doing.
Yeah, fine, yes, we'll hear
All
that.
for peace, but
Stephen?
I'm also being a bit of, I'm putting the spanner in the works here.
Yep,
So
we can tell, it's all right.
okay,
We're happy to
being a
get all
pest,
spanners in works.
yeah.
We're not engineers, and in many ways, I think part of an answer to your question is it's like
Are you joining
it's
us?
not necessarily up to us to find the solutions and grapple with the solutions. Us over here or wherever we are aren't necessarily able to come up with solutions. Obviously, Hanan will have a perspective on that, and hopefully Anora as well. But Stephen, do you want to ask something? You need to unmute if you can. There.
Thank you, Rabbi, and happy Hanukkah to everybody as well. I just wanted to say thank you very much to Hanan.
Oh, hello, better. That's it.
You put me back on mute. Sorry about that. I just heard what I said. Happy Hanukkah, and I was really inspired by what the rabbi had to say, and you know the focus on dialogue are so essential. The humanizing of the other through face-to-face dialogue. I mean, so much we can learn, in so many different communities, not just your own community, Rabbi, and the Palestinian community. So thank you for sharing that. I mean, I'm a teacher. I work in Manchester. I'm a Muslim, and we have Jewish children in my school. We have Muslim children and Christian children, obviously. Manchester has the second biggest Jewish community in the UK. And I have 3 synagogues just down the road from me as well, here in South Manchester. So this dialogue and this method of doing dialogue is phenomenal, and it's kind of it's really interesting to hear you that you've been doing this so recently. I mean, this is something that I've been fortunate and blessed enough to be doing for forever, basically. And again, we're blessed living in a place like Manchester, where we have a freer society, we have more freedom of movement and the freedom to access transport, etc., together, and going to schools together. It really facilitates that. And of course, I forget that you don't have that in your part of the world very often. And it really makes me sad. And I really, want to say thank you for everything you're doing to create those spaces. You're absolutely right. It is a sacred space. I just wanted to add, though, to the lady who, I'm sorry, I can't see her now. Is it Ruth? Possibly, I don't know. Or Karen. Yeah, she asked about what can be done to stop the propaganda that is perpetrated, presumably she's alleging, in Palestinian society with regards to demonizing Jewish people. I mean, I would to balance that out, and I suspect the rabbi would agree. I would really also like to ask what is being done in Israeli society and in the settler communities to stop I should imagine exactly the same type of demonization of Palestinian children within their communities and cultures. Thank you.
So Hanan, you may have you missed Karen's point, which was asking or raising the question about if the Palestinian children are being fed very anti-Israel propaganda, how can there be moves to peace? And obviously Stephen's addressed that partly with his as well. So firstly, any news on Noor? And then do you want to fill that those questions and anything else?
4 minutes ago, Noor said that within 5 minutes he'll be with us, so that should be another minute. So
and then are you able to answer something about the propaganda that's being fed to children on one or both sides?
So I have a very unconventional response. I think that the preponderance of talk in Israeli society about the propaganda that Palestinian kids are being fed, I think that itself is propaganda. It's part of the Jewish propaganda. We Jews convince ourselves that the Palestinians are always being fed propaganda against us. And we don't realize that, number one, we do the same thing against them. And secondly, what I just said, that the very emphasis we put on the so-called propaganda they're making against us is part of our own propaganda. So look, my opinion is that each side has to clean up its own backyard. There may be some problematic Palestinian textbooks and problematic Palestinian news broadcasts. Yes, there is. But that they'll deal with. My Palestinian partners will deal with that. I have to deal with my own problems. And the thing is that my community isn't even aware of the problem. So it's just first about opening eyes. Until you're aware the other exists, you don't see how prejudiced you are. But we are going against the grain. We're swimming against the current. At this point, within Judah and Samaria, the West Bank, Roots is pretty alone, trying to hold up the fort. I saw in the chat here, Rabbi Fruman was mentioned. He's our spiritual father. His widow is one of the founders of Roots, Hadassah Fruman. Just today, I spent with Hadassah and with one of Rav Fruman and Hadassah's kids, Shivi Fruman, and Shivi's wife. They're involved very much in Roots. There's not too many other good things happening on this front in Judah and Samaria. But I just will add just one thing, which is we have two new branches of Roots, one in the Jordan Valley and one in Samaria, and between Nablus and Ariel. So we're trying to expand. It's slow going. It's not enough. Drop by drop. I see Karen is raising her hand, but I don't know what you want to do this. Noor just joined us. If you guys decide how we're doing this.
I just want to follow up what you said about Rabbi Froman. I know he was an amazing man, and I have friends that live in Tekoa, and who only sing his praises. So I have family that live in Gush Etzion, so I know the area quite well, and my heart's quite there. Actually, I love the area. I can see why you live there.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for that, Hanan, that answer as well. And welcome, Noor. Really glad you can be with us. Thank you for joining us. Are you happy and ready to address us?
Yeah, thank you, Warren. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you.
Very, very sorry that I am late. I got just stuck in the traffic. I had some problems with my connection. However, I'm here. So good evening, everyone. My name is Noor Awad, and I'm a member of Roots. And I'll be telling you a little bit about who I am and how I joined this initiative. So I live today in Bethlehem, here in Palestine, but I was born in Amman in Jordan in 1991. I was born there to a Palestinian family, and I usually say that my story goes back to 42 years before I was born. Now, 42 years from when I was born, that was 1948. And in 1948, my family actually did not live in Jordan. They lived here in Palestine. They lived actually in Jerusalem, in southwest of Jerusalem, in a very small village called Malha. And they found themselves on the front lines of the Israeli-Arab war in 1948. And part of the catastrophe to our family is that my family had to leave their village. They had to leave they were forced to leave their village in the war to go to a refugee camp not far away from their village. And they stayed in this refugee camp north of Bethlehem, thinking this will be like few days, maybe few weeks, and they will go back to their village. But they ended up staying in the refugee camp for 1.5 years. And after the war ended with a ceasefire, they are now on the eastern side in what became called the West Bank in a refugee camp. And their village, Malha, is part of west of Jerusalem on the other side of the ceasefire line, the Green Line, where they are not allowed to come back as Palestinian refugees. So my grandfather didn't want to stay in the camp. He actually took my grandmother and their children, and they moved out from the refugee camp to the little town of Bethlehem. Both of my parents were born here in Bethlehem in late 1950s and 1960s. And they lived their lives since then under the Israeli occupation. My father, who wanted to leave the country, and he was going to Europe, he was planning to go to Europe. He got a job in Amman, he stayed there. My mother followed him, they got married, and that's how I was born there. In 1995, the Oslo peace process was 2 years old now. Things are happening differently. For the first time in their lives, and instead of talking about the Intifada and occupation and conflict, they are talking about a peace agreement. Now there is the hope of ending the occupation, and soon there will be a state of Palestine. So both of my parents were in college, and they were very optimistic to actually come back here to Palestine and re-establish for us a life and future. So my family moved back, and this is when me and my brother, we came to live here in Bethlehem. And let me tell you, in 1990s, as a young kid, I didn't really encounter so much of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't remember so much of the occupation. And anyone who was born in the 90s maybe would connect with what I will say, because most of my childhood memories is about the times when we used to go to Jerusalem every weekend. Sometimes every day in the week, I go with my father to his work in Jerusalem when I have a chance. And that was so easy. It wasn't very complicated. There wasn't really these barriers that exist today. Checkpoints were different. I didn't notice them sometimes. And sometimes you could even drive to Jerusalem, like from Bethlehem. So that's how I remember it. The weekends, we go to the beach in Jaffa. We go to the north of the country, south. We travel around. That's what I experienced. And I think that I usually say I experienced a normal life. But soon the year 2000 came, and the peace process came to a dead end. With no solution. It created a very frustrating situation on the ground, very complicated one. And we got stuck there in the middle. And the second Intifada started, the second Palestinian uprising. That was a very violent time, a different time from what I used to so far. And I have to learn new concepts. I have to learn about the occupation, because at some point the Israeli military invaded Bethlehem, invaded the city where I live. Some of my cousins were members of the armed forces, or the armed groups during the second Intifada, and they participated in. I can say for large part, my family was very active in the second Intifada. And I heard of people that I knew or my family knew who got killed, who got arrested. And so I couldn't go to school for weeks and months, curfews. So all of a sudden, I'm now dealing with this new reality. I'm dealing with the reality of the conflict, of the occupation, and I am realizing, and I'm growing up and realizing where I live and what's around me. By the end of the second Intifada, you can say that as a young teenager, I started to think more about myself and asking myself the question, what should I do? Do I see for myself a future here? Do I see for myself a normal life? You know, guys, we are in the age of the internet. And at that age, I was looking around and I see that many people around me, most of the people around, like in the world, in my age, are living a normal life. They don't have to deal with all of these conflicts and the consequences of it. So I start to say that I have no actually future for me here. And what should I do? I should just run away from here, find a different place, find the normal life somewhere else. That's how I grew up thinking. And I think that many of my generation, it's not only my thought, it's not only my idea, I think many of my generation also grow up thinking about it this way. In some way, we have a bad luck, and that we were born here, and my parents brought me here, and I should just run away. But on the other hand, I came across a different way of thinking that totally contradicts what I just said. Now, when we talk about the occupation, and by the word we, I'm referring to this generation, to this Palestinian generation, we sometimes blame the older generations, the past generations, for our situation. We say that it's their fault. They didn't take enough responsibility. They are the ones who are responsible for what we have today. We didn't choose the situation. We were born to it. And I say to myself, but all the time, what I'm thinking about is how I will run away from here. I am not taking any form of responsibility. I didn't feel like I'm taking responsibility in this mess, in this situation. And I'm accusing the past generations or the older generations of not taking responsibility. So I started to think that, no, I need to do something different. And instead of all the time blaming my grandparents and my parents and the generations before us, this generation need to stand up to understand that this is our time now, and we are the ones who will change. But as a Palestinian living in these consequences, the first idea in my mind when I think about change, if I want to improve my life, the Israeli occupation is a big obstacle for that. So the first idea that comes to my mind is, to live a normal life, we have to get rid of the occupation. And getting rid of the occupation mostly translates to violence, or to violent resistance, to violent actions. And I came to learn about non-violent ways as well, and more of a civil, non-violent social or society-like activism. But all of that work is not being done with Israelis. Israelis here are not partners. The Israelis here are the society that basically occupy us. They are the occupation. So it's being done by working against them. I mean, there wasn't like a chance for me to see Israelis as partners, because the Israelis I met are soldiers at checkpoints, or Israeli settlers in the news, the ones who take more and more land every day. So that's how I encountered it. Until in 2014, I actually got my tour guiding license from the Palestinian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities here in Bethlehem. And I started to officially guide groups in the West Bank, mostly in Bethlehem and Ramallah and Hebron. Sometimes I get the chance to guide in East Jerusalem. It depends, because that's very complicated. And in 2016, I had this group of students, American students, who I was asked to guide them in Hebron, south of the West Bank. And I remember that day, I took this group to the city of Hebron to show them the situation there, talking about the occupation, about the reality of Hebron, what's happening before Oslo, after Oslo, what's happening now. And after a long day being guided by me, I mean this group, and listening to the reality there, and seeing and visiting the city, and also meeting with some people from there, some Palestinians from Hebron. There was supposed to be a meeting with an Israeli settler, an Israeli person who lives in the old city of Hebron, who's supposed to represent the Israeli settlers community and their point of view on the situation of Hebron. Now, I just want to add something very important, that until that moment, I met very few Israelis. I said I live here in the West Bank in Bethlehem, in Palestine. For me to go to Jerusalem or to go to Tel Aviv, to the coastal cities, I need to get a special permission from the Israeli military, especially after the Second Intifada. This permission system became very severe and very controlling of our lives and movement. From the year 2000 until 2013, for 13 years basically, I didn't have a chance to get a permission. So even if I want to choose, or even if I want to see someone who is Israeli, who's other than soldier, that's hard, because in the West Bank, all of what I see are Israeli soldiers and Israeli settlers, as I mentioned. I don't have the ability to move or to go to different places outside of the West Bank and maybe get the chance to meet normal Israelis. And at the end of the day, what do you mean by normal Israelis? We live in a narrative, we live in a reality where they, all of them, they are the enemy, either us or them. So I meet this Israeli settler with my group. I got the chance actually to be in the meeting, which was also very, I mean, technically that's difficult, but we managed to do it. And then he started to talk about his story to us, why he chose to leave the US, immigrate to Israel, and live in the heart of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, in the occupied territories here. And he spoke about himself, but in his story, he said two things. One, there is no occupation, he said. We are not occupiers. We came back to our ancestral homeland. This is our ancestral homeland. This is what the history and the story of this land basically says. So therefore, it can't be occupation. He was saying these words, and I was saying, what are you talking about? Because all of my life, I grew up, and my life is basically centered around this occupation, around this fact. I am so affected by it. And you come and say, you know, this Mr. Settler from the West Bank, there is no occupation. What do you mean there is no occupation? And then the second thing he said, there is no Palestinian people, or the Palestinian people identity is made up thing. It's fake, it's not legitimate, it's not a true, it's not a genuine thing. And I mean, I hear this claim before, but I never really met a person that believes and carries this claim and actually confront me with it. And what I basically felt at that moment, that I am totally denied by this guy. I am completely denied. I have no presence, I have no existence. And maybe we do the same. Maybe when we say that, you know, Zionism is European colonialism, there is no such thing as Israeli people. There is no such thing as Israeli identity. It's not genuine. We also do the same. I didn't think back then we do the same. I think that this guy basically denies me. I left Hebron very frustrated that day with the group on the way back to Bethlehem. And on the way back, we headed to Roots. I knew nothing about Roots. I knew that we are going to meet with Hanan. I didn't know Hanan, and I thought that he's just a settler who's going to talk to us about the life in Gush Etzion. But it turned out that Roots is a peace organization. It's a joint work between Palestinians and Israelis, and he's going to talk about it. And I was still shocked. I mean, how could it be? What do you mean peace with settlers? And then Hanan spoke. He told us his story, the same story that he just told you. And I was sitting there with so many reactions to his story. The first reactions were very negative, because the things that he is talking about as his identity are also the source of problem to me. But then his ability to see both sides and to recognize what's happening on my side was mind-blowing. I mean, I never imagined that there could be a voice like this. And because I felt that what I am listening from Hanan, despite or different from the voice I heard in Hebron, was a voice of empathy and a voice of recognition. And that's exactly the exact opposite of what I heard in Hebron. And I actually chose, I said to myself, this could be a partner. This is my partner. This is someone I can listen to. This is someone I can work with. And I went back to Roots to learn more about it. And I met more activists. And I felt so interested in the idea and the concept of this initiative. And I decided to join. Well, that's it. And I am here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you very, very much. So we've heard from an occupying settler and an occupied Palestinian, or a settler and a Palestinian, both looking to ways for peace and for increasing understanding and respecting each other's existence, rights, and humanity, and place in the land too. So we're happy now to open it up for questions. Let's try and just keep them to questions as opposed to making points, I think, if we can. And would anyone like to, so I haven't seen, is there something in chat? No, anyone want to say anything that's, yes, John, thank you.
It's a question. Thank you both very, very much for such a fascinating talk. You said that branches of Roots are being set up at other places in the West Bank. Have any been set up within Israel itself? And by that I mean within the state of Israel. Or do you feel do you feel that there is a need for you to operate there as well? Or are you just thinking of operating in the occupied Palestinian territory? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, John. We don't have any branches and don't have any activity within the state of Israel proper, only in the West Bank. The reasons for that is that first of all, there are other organizations that operate within Israel proper. There's literally 100 different dialogue organizations of different sorts within Israel proper, whereas within the West Bank specifically, there's just about nothing. So every organization has to focus. Now, why do we focus in the West Bank? Number one, because that's where we're from. But number two, it's really important for us to make the local connections. We're not a national organization. It's local people meeting local people. And what I want to specify about the West Bank, it's not just that the territory is the heart of the conflict. I mean, the West Bank territory. So we're working the heart of the conflict, but it's also the people that we're working with are at the heart of the conflict. The Jews are mostly religious people like me, mostly what you'd call on the right side of the political map, the right wing. These are the people that are the problem. We know that religion is part of the problem. Religious identity is part of the problem. Until we involve right wing and or religious Jews in trying to meet Palestinians and create reconciliation, peace, till we bring in this population, we're never going to get anywhere. And on the Palestinian side, we work very much with refugee families like Noor's family, and with religious Muslims, and with Palestinians that have loved ones in jail, in Israeli jail. In other words, we're working with the heart of the conflict on both human sides. And again, on the Israeli left, they're already willing to make peace. We're working where people aren't yet ready. We're doing the work that has to be done.
Oh, do you want to add anything to that?
No, Hanan mostly said everything, and I just want to add again, like the focus is very local. We are very like locally focusing, and we think about like expanding our work all the time. I think it's like a very big mission when we come to talk about like talking about to the settlers community, to the Palestinian community here in the West Bank. We believe that we are dealing with the people who are on the front lines of this conflict, and it's a huge deal. And there are other organizations that also very active in Israel proper. So that's it.
Thank you. Who's next? Jane?
Can I speak?
Oh yeah, go on, Ibrahim.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. I just would like to ask how many Palestinian believe what you're talking about, and how many Israelis believe what you're talking about as well. So both sides, if I ask you in separate, how many people from your nation believe in your opinion and can be happened?
Noor, you want to answer first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, many people will be against us in my society. Many people think that they don't have a trust with Israelis. They don't think that Israelis are partners for peace. And so basically they will not agree with me. That's basically why Roots exist, because most of my society does not actually agree with these beliefs that I just shared and I have.
How many percent do you think?
How many? You mean the percentage?
Yeah.
I think, okay, so when it comes to percentages, this is my personal opinion. This is not based on any official statistic. I think that from like the reactions I get, 70% of the people are very skeptical, suspicious about the work I do. When I joined Roots and I start to share with my friends, many of them got angry with me. Why I'm now talking to Israeli settlers? How could I justify such thing? Many people will call me also naive for doing it. Some people will be curious, and some people were supportive. But as I said, like the majority are very suspicious and skeptical of the work that I do. And basically they look at the bigger picture. They see the everyday actions by, for example, the Israeli government, the military, what's happening, and that's how they base their opinion. Because for most of them, they don't have like connections with Israelis, with just regular Israelis. And that's how people around me feel about it. There are, of course, there is like a portion who will be totally against it. It depends, the different opinions. I have people, for example, who are against my work. They are not against working with Israelis, for example, but they are against my work because it's directly with settlers and it's officially being done with settlers. And I have people who are against the work in total, who don't believe that we can work with the Israelis or we can trust them.
And the same thing on my side. The things you heard in this event tonight go against the grain of Israeli society, and all the more so go against the grain of the way the religious Jews and the Jews in Judea and Samaria, the way they think. The things I talked about today are scandalous and are traitorous in the eyes of most of my neighbors. Traitorous, scandalous, ridiculous, naive.
Yeah. Yeah, how many percentage they believe your opinion and they can live in peace with Palestinians?
I would say something like 5% of people around here would agree with the things I said naturally, and another 5% agree with them because they've come to Roots activities. But it's still a drop in the bucket. We admit we're not claiming we've changed the world yet. It's just the beginning of the path.
Let me
Yeah.
just add to that. 4 years ago, there was this poll that was like done in a cooperation between an Israeli university and Palestinian Statistics Center. And the question, there was like several questions about it. And the first question was, do you support like going back to negotiations and like a peace agreement? And more than 50% of the people on both sides had a negative opinion. They didn't, the word peace comes with very bad like memories, with bad actions. It doesn't bring anything positive. Most of the people don't actually support it. But when the second question, when they say if the Israeli government, for example, stopped settlement building as a step for like rebuilding trust between both sides, then the numbers of people who answered yes, I would support such thing, rise on the Palestinian side. There was a similar question: what if the Palestinians, for example, recognized Israel as a Jewish state? And the number of Israelis who answered yes, we will support such a negotiations or like a political process, also rise. And that shows that people are looking for actions, waiting for actions, and not just talk. Because if you say today peace, it's a very vague, it's very negative in our context, that the word itself, after 25 years of a failure peace process. Also in what's happening in our region today, for example, like the way how the Abraham Accords between the United Arab Emirates affected Palestinians, it's different from how it affected Israeli society. So that also fit into the issue if we are talking about it. So you can't, you can't just say that does Palestinians and Israelis support peace, because like for many Palestinians and many Israelis, the word itself doesn't really have a positive meaning. That's what I want to say. But once you start to talk about actions and real change and steps on the ground, then people have more clear vision of what you are talking about.
Thank you both, and thank you for the question, Ibrahim. I think it's always difficult to know exactly the percentages and numbers in favor of various things. A whole variety of different surveys have been done where people are sort of asked about whether they want peace and see a way forward. And it's fairly mixed numbers. I think the vast majority want peace and wants an end to the hostilities and the conflicts, but a lot of people don't see a way forward, and that's one of the things, which is why initiatives such as this, the Roots, are so important, because it's vital that people actually talk and understand each other and get to know each other and see the human face on the other side, so to speak. Gilang, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Warren. First of all, thank you very much for Hanan and Noor for the excellent presentation. My name is Gilang. I'm an Indonesian student at Oxford. I have two questions, if I may. The first question pertains to the issue of historical injustice. It seems to me that in order to be a comfortable participant in the conversation that you have in your initiative, you have to have the readiness to focus more on the present and the future, and somewhat set aside the issue of the past for a while. Whereas some people argue that in order to attain peace, actually addressing historical injustice is very, very important. Things like right of return, etc., etc. What is your opinion on that? Do your platform deliberately kind of frame the discussion to focus on the present and future, and somewhat not focusing so much on the past, or not? The second question, if I may, is on the issue of political settlement. I think Hanan mentioned that yes, it is we are doing more on the like grassroots level, but it is also important on the political elite level. But I would observe and I would argue that, don't you think the grassroots initiative will always be held hostage by what is happening in the political level? Like, you've been doing there for 7 years, and then like suddenly 2 or 3 years ago, we are witnessing such a drastic deterioration of conflict resolution from both sides. Does this development kind of like feel you debilitated? You feel like this is not worth doing anymore, or you are ready to kind of like continue this effort despite what kind of development happening on the political level?
The questions are better than the answers, I think, but we'll try. Give me a few seconds to collect my thoughts. Look, we in Roots, as far as I understand, do not ignore anything. There's nothing that is forbidden to talk about. Everything's on the table and everything has to be addressed. You can't just let sores and pain and suffering from the past fester. You have to talk about it, you have to process it, and you certainly have to acknowledge the other side's pain and suffering. But the question is timing. At what stage do you do that? So it seems, in our experience, that you can't begin in the first meeting by opening historical wounds. That won't get you anywhere. First, you have to talk about the more superficial things, the more basic things, the more human things. We found in Roots that interfaith dialogue, talking about similarities and differences between Islam and Judaism, is a very good way to begin. I'll say parenthetically here that there's lots of Israelis that wouldn't want to talk to Palestinians, but they're willing to talk to Muslims. It's the same thing. It depends how you frame it. If you frame it as a talk with Palestinians, no, that's out of bounds because that's political, and there are no such things as Palestinians. But we do admit there's such a thing as Muslims. So we'll talk to Muslims, we'll have interfaith dialogue with Muslims, but just don't call them Palestinians. So it's good to talk about the things that don't press too many buttons. So we begin by talking about music and religion and food and families. But then we press to get to important stuff. If the participants don't want to get to the deep historical injustice and the pains, we actually press them to go there. You can't just leave it festering. And of course, what happens is each side only knows its own historical injustice. You don't know the other side's sense of their injustice, what they suffered. And if you've built up enough empathy to begin with the religious stuff and the human stuff, then when you start talking about each side, about its pain, its historical pain, there's enough empathy to listen and to say, yeah, that's my friend telling me this, so it must be true and it must be real. And then we get to the place that I talked about two truths, about realizing, yes, I suffered terrible historical injustice, but he did also. The other side did also. And we have to acknowledge the pain and the suffering of the past and of the present. And I think that there's some organizations that don't go to the deep places that we go to in Roots. In Roots, we go to the core. So that's your first question. And of course, I'll give time to Noor to answer, but I'll just go to your second question, was about, yes, of course. The grassroots work we do is held hostage by the politicians, and the politicians are held hostage by the lack of the grassroots, right? Because the politicians can't move forward with a radical solution unless the people are ready. But the people can't become ready until the politicians are ready. So it has to be both concurrently. And you're right that presently it's not both concurrently. The politicians are doing nothing except for making it worse. So we have a problem.
So for the first question, actually, I have a different answer from Hanan in a way. I think that most of what I witnessed at Roots from like, I mean, listen, the name of the organization, the name of the initiative is Roots. And one of the reasons why is that because we go to the roots of our identities, we believe that our identities is the reason for the conflict and the roots of it, and the roots of both people to the land. And I had seen like many encounters of Roots. I witnessed many encounters at Roots where people actually do go to speak about like the historical injustices and the historical claims on both sides. And actually, what happens is that most of the time it's a very respectful conversation. It's easy to try to diminish and to delegitimize the other side claim when it's only just a claim and it's a thought. It's an idea that you read it somewhere and you want to deny it. But when there's a person in front of you, like with his or her flesh and blood, and they are sitting in front of you and they are talking about their family story, their experiences, you will find the other side completely listening and trying to like observe and understand the experience of another human being. I witnessed that so many times at Roots, and I think that it automatically happens once people meet eye to eye and they sit together and actually it's like a very respectful encounter. And we talk about it. We as Hanan said, sometimes we try to direct like the dialogue to talk more about it, but also because of the nature of the people who are coming to Roots, we found also ourselves focusing on the situation today. As I mentioned, we are like the communities that lives in the front lines of this conflict, in the occupied territories, in Area C, in the West Bank. So everything that happens, there are issues that affects both societies, and we talk about like the military or the police in Area C and what it is doing. It's affecting both societies, and it's a common thing that both people feel the need to talk to and to talk about. And for the second question, I completely agree with you. I mean, yes, I think that one of the biggest challenges at Roots, and I've been at Roots now for 4.5 years, is the lack of a political process. There are many people who are curious and for other reasons want to attend, and they attend. Some people want, or they dedicate themselves or their energy, like to invest their energy in this work. But I think we are moving very slow because of the lack of a political initiative. And actually, I was in an argument with a friend 2 days ago exactly about this point. He started this discussion by saying that the work we do is pointless because there is no political initiative, there is no political will. And he was also mostly accusing the Israeli side. He said the Israeli government has no political will, so you can't expect that this work will go anywhere. Actually, the small achievements that you do is not going to change anything. But I think that our work is still a must until the political atmosphere changes.
Thank you both. It is almost 6:30. Is there one final question that anyone's desperate to ask? Yes, John, again.
Thank you very much, if I may. Following on from the answers from the two speakers just now, I'd be interested, do you ever find in your meetings that you discuss the rights of each party in terms of international law and the rights of individuals in terms of international law?
I would say that we certainly discuss the rights of both sides, the right to freedom of movement, freedom of expression, the right to land, the right to a livelihood, the right to build on your land. But sometimes the Palestinians phrase it in terms of international law, but the Israelis, and I think usually in our conversations, it's more in terms, not of international law, but in terms of right and wrong.
Mhm.
I feel that the Palestinians are being wronged by my people, not because of international law, but because it's just the wrong thing to do from the point of view of religion and ethics. It's just in my kish, as we say, right? It's in my innards that I can't stomach injustice. Noor, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. I want to say, from my experience, that most of Palestinians and Israelis at roots do not refer that much to the international law. Don't think really it will make a difference. Again, I wanna like assure that, or I wanna remind you that the people who come to our activities and to these organizations are the ones who are holding to their identity. You don't find a lot of agreements based on the international law. Mostly, as Hanan said, like people think about it from the perspective of right and wrong. That's how it happens, not from a perspective of international law.
Thank you both very much.
Yes, I think that sort of very much from some of the things in the chat and the feelings. I think very much your honesty and openness and the willingness to engage with the difficult issues, to embrace them actually in some ways, because without doing that, clearly the brokenness of the relationships and society cannot be addressed. And yeah, we have to start somewhere. And very clearly, it sounds that Roots is grappling with all of those issues, and treating each other with utmost respect, and very much as neighbors. You are neighbors there with each other, and in some ways, whereas so many of your fellows are saying you can't do this, you are showing that the willingness to love your neighbor is very important, and maybe even transforming the position of being strangers and loving the strangers to being loving the neighbors. And hopefully that is something that you'll be able to continue to do and go from strength to strength. So thank you to Noor, and thank you to Hanan. Hanan, you want to say something, obviously?
I have a closing of 2 minutes.
Go on. 1 minute, 45 seconds.
I'm going to share my screen. So anyone wants to take a screenshot of this, we want you to know about our website, friendsofroots.net. You can go there and read about our work and sign up there for our quarterly newsletter. You can go to my personal website, ravhanan.org, where there's a lot of material that goes deep into this conflict. You can go to Facebook to Friends of Roots and like us there, spread our word. Of course, we'd be happy to get donations, as you see on the screen. And when the pandemic is over, invite us to England, to Manchester, to speak in your churches and your mosques and your synagogues and universities. And there's other things on the sheet that you can take a look at. Perhaps you want to take a screenshot of it. I know time is short, so I won't read the whole thing. And I want to close by saying the following. First of all, thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Jane and to Warren, and of course to Sadia, who I was in contact with quite a bit. It's very rare that we get to talk to an audience that includes Muslims. Unfortunately, it's usually mostly Jews, a few Christians. This is one of the few opportunities we've had to talk to an audience that has a significant amount of Muslims. I just want to thank you for that opportunity, especially. And the last thing I'll say is that if you came into this conversation tonight as a strong supporter of Palestine, we hope you will leave as a strong supporter of Palestine. And if you entered into the conversation as a strong supporter of Israel, we hope you will leave as a strong supporter of Israel. But the thing is, please don't leave as a strong supporter of one side at the expense of the other side. That will only bring us more conflict. we suggest that you leave as a strong supporter of both sides, pro-Israel, pro-Palestine. That's the only way to really be pro-peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanan. Very clearly, that is an important message I hope we can all take away from this. Yes, and thank you, Nora, as well. And we believe it is important to provide these opportunities for us to meet, to listen, to hear opinions on both sides that show that there is hope, that there is a need and a willingness to listen to each other, to the voices that don't necessarily agree with our perspective and our view of what's going on. Yeah, so we say that, so if you have two Jews, you have three opinions. You throw in some Muslims and Christians into the mix, and God knows how many opinions we're going to get. So we're very, very grateful on the first night of Hanukkah that Hanan and Noor, you've joined us tonight. And to all of you who come along to listen, to engage in these issues. It's very much what FODIP is about. We hope that we'll be able to have more opportunities of having other seminars with Roots, as well as some of the other speakers and initiatives that we've been in touch with in the past, and more we want to reach out to as well. Obviously, Roots needs funding. As treasurer, I will say that FODIP also is looking and in need of funding at the moment. So any opportunities you can throw our way to, let us know, please. And in conclusion, we will be continuing with more work on this sort in the new year, that is the new secular year, or 2021. Just thank you, all of you, for being with us. Happy Hanukkah, happy rest of Advent and Christmas, and season's greetings to everyone. Jane, do you want to say anything else?
No, I think I know people need to leave, but I just want to say Kol HaKavod. I don't know what the Arabic equivalent of that is, but all respect to you and the work that you're doing. It's amazing. And interestingly, Ali Abu Awad was a catalyst for the foundation of FODIP as well, which is a story I won't go into now, but we've met on many occasions. We've also been to Hebron with our trips, and a lot of people who are in participating this evening. I think some of them too will have come with us, and we know what a really, really tough place it can be at times. And so our thoughts and prayers are with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Hanan and Nora. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Let's keep on with conflict resolution, ideals of peace that we strive for among our communities here, and we're with and pray for all the communities in Israel and Palestine through all the difficulties, so that our grassroots actions can create political initiatives and commitment towards peace as well. Thank you, everyone.